Thank you indeed, and good morning to you, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Can I say that I've been introduced as a dragon, and that doesn't often imply the sense of being at peace. But can I tell you that when I was growing up in the border counties of Cavan, right across the border here in the south, I grew up in Cavan. I was born in Monaghan. I now live in Louth. My father was from Donegal. I grew up very cognizant of the fact that there were troubles in the northern part of our country. And so I guess many of us were often faced with the dilemma that some of our colleagues and school friends growing up may well have been brought into the conflict in one way or another. And yet I think many of our lives can be dictated to or influenced by key mentors or teachers. And I had one such teacher who was a constitutional nationalist, is how he described himself. He was a priest. He was a very religious man, a very humble man, very committed to the arts and very committed to sport, and was a president of the GAA in Ulster. And he laid down something for me at a very young age, and that was, Seán, when you look back in history, you will see many people who have died for Ireland, very much like Damian was talking about martyrdom. He said, if I could give you one piece of advice, do not die for Ireland, but instead live for Ireland. And I guess for me, that's how I have visioned my life. And I think for many of us, when we live in a country, particularly like Ireland, and we live in the south, where now, thankfully, we have peace, very few of us understand how can we influence peace in the country, and most importantly, in our families and in our communities. And yet I think all of us, every single day, are called to be just that, to be peacemakers. I often say that sometimes in communities and in the country, we wait for other people to be the leaders, and yet we are all called to be leaders. And how do we set peace? And I think sometimes we see that peace is somewhere else and somebody else's responsibility. And yet I spend so much of my time in schools and colleges trying to encourage young people to gain the sense of confidence and self-esteem that allows them to lead their own life to the fullest of their ability, but also to make a real major impact in the lives of others. All of us have people around us who give us a sense of confidence, a sense of encouragement to be the very best that we can be. And sometimes I think that is as much about creating peace. There's a lot of people who live, my experience in recent years has been through the downturn economically. There are many people who live quiet lives of desperation, and I think we can, in our own way, reach out to help them have peace. Peace in their community, but also peace of mind. I'm also very much involved and have been for many years as an entrepreneur. But before ever I became an entrepreneur, I was committed to youth work and community development. I'm a professional youth and community worker. And when I worked in the inner cities, I saw much conflict. I saw young people who were drawn into crime. I worked in the inner city here in St. Michael's, St. Lawrence's Youth Detention Centre. People who became involved in all sorts of antisocial behaviour, born out of the fact that that's what they witnessed around them as they grew up. That was the community, and that was the set of values that they were living to. There, but for the grace of God, go any of us. Had we grown up in those environments, we too would probably have taken different paths. And yet, in all the work that I did in trying to create a sense of confidence in those young people so that they could take their rightful place in community, I clearly understood that there were only two things that would really solve disadvantage, and that's very much about education and awareness and about employment. And when we look at this country of Ireland, we see that we suffered greatly economically because we did not have peace. In the border areas, our entire communities and indeed economies suffered because of the conflict in the north. Northern Ireland suffered because it could not attract foreign direct investment. And so there's a real tangible effect in communities and in countries and in regions and in economies where conflict exists. You cannot invest in infrastructure. We saw in the north much of the infrastructure being bombed. We saw little confidence in terms of economy and in terms of investment. And yet it is that very investment that we need in order to attract business, to provide employment that creates stability, that ultimately creates peace. And in the young people that I have worked with, I saw that what we needed to do was to create a sense of confidence, but most importantly, a sense of awareness of all our roles. And awareness is important. And that's why education, I believe, gives people that awareness. And that education equips them to go on to show that they're not passive recipients, they're not passengers in life, they're in the driving seat, and they too have a role in creating peace and in creating community. I've been a passionate believer all my life that in order to have a stable society, you have to have people who understand their role, the impact and the influence of their role, and importantly, community. Because when we believe and belong to a community, we protect and support that community. And there's one thing that I have noticed, perhaps in the downturn in Ireland, and if there is one upside to this downturn, is that we are going back to the very principles of community, of honesty, of integrity, of authenticity, but of the support, of supporting each other, because we clearly will recognize that it is in the collective rather than the individual where the next chapter of our country will be written. And I think it will be based on sound values. And I was listening to Damian in terms of Columbanus, and, you know, as a saint, as somebody who set up monasteries, who was involved in creating peace. I think the role for all of us is that we've got to go out and make the major impact in our lives in how we can create peace in all our communities and individually. I'm setting out, as was explained, as an independent presidential candidate. I don't want to talk to you here today about that, except that I've laid a platform that I want to do for enterprise and job creation, what Mary McAleese, our president, now has done for the peace process. But that could never happen unless there was a peace process. And I think Mary McAleese, our president, has done much. And 14 years ago, she set out to put a theme forward, because presidents in country in Ireland don't have agendas and don't have manifestos. Presidents have themes. And she put 14 years ago the theme of bridge building, of building bridges, north and south, and east and west. And she has worked tirelessly with her husband Martin to do just that, with the culmination recently of the visit of Queen Elizabeth to Ireland. Last week, I visited a very important and well-recognised tourist spot in Cashel, in Tipperary, in the south part of this country. And a very tangible benefit of the image transmitted around the world of the Queen visiting the Rock of Cashel, a tourist location, meant that in the last 6 months, we have seen an increase of 65% in the numbers visiting that area. And the knock-on effect that that has had on the economy, on pubs, on bars and restaurants and coffee shops, on craft makers, on small industry, which is the glue that holds that entire community together. And so peace and prosperity are so inextricably linked. And so is community. And so is the role of every individual. So my message as I travel to speak to young people, to speak to communities, to speak to businesses, is that all of us play an important role in our communities. All of us play an important role in building peace in those communities. And when we have peace, we have the foundation for prosperity. And when you have peace and prosperity, you have a happy nation. And isn't that what all of us would dearly love? Thank you.